Now, you've endorsed Donald Trump for president. Judges and 2 separate juries have found him liable for rape and for defaming the victim of that rape. How do you square your endorsement of Donald Trump with the testimony we just saw?
Well, I will tell you, I was raped at the age of 16. And any rape victim will tell you, I've lived for 30 years with an incredible amount of shame over being raped. I didn't come forward because of that judgment and shame that I felt. And it's a shame that you will never feel, George. And I'm not going to sit here on your show and be asked a question meant to shame me.
George Stephanopoulos wanted to know why, as a victim of rape herself, Representative Nancy Mace has decided to support and endorse former President Donald Trump. Now, he was found liable for sexual assault in the E. Jean Carroll situation, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But Nancy Mace did not take kindly to that question, as you can tell in the clip we just showed you, and repeatedly accused Stephanopoulos of shaming her as a rape victim. Now, before we get to more of their exchange, it is important to refresh our memories about what exactly Trump was found liable for. Now, according to writer E. Jean Carroll, she and Trump had bumped into each other in a department store back in the mid-1990s. So, Trump said that he wanted help picking out a gift for another woman, and apparently E. Jean Carroll obliged and said that she would assist him. They went into a dressing room, Carroll alleged, where Trump quickly attacked her, forcing his fingers and then his penis inside her vagina. Carroll said she kneed him and fled, telling 2 friends and then remaining silent until 2019. Now, a civil jury in New York found in May of 2023 that former President Donald Trump sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll, for which he recently posted a $91.6 million bond as he appeals this ruling, okay? And by the way, he continues to defame her, and so he keeps getting slapped with additional defamation allegations by E. Jean Carroll because he can't help himself. He is his own worst enemy. Now, in the first clip that we showed you, Stephanopoulos claims that Trump was found liable for rape, which isn't exactly correct. So look, we want to be as accurate as possible. Rather, Trump was found liable of sexual assault, which doesn't really make the situation better in my mind, but it's not the same as rape. So it's important to be clear there. He's also been accused of sexual assault by at least 25 other women since the 1970s. None of those allegations ever went to court. The E. Jean Carroll civil case was the only example of something being taken to court and Trump being found guilty of sexual abuse. Now, that's why George Stephanopoulos decided to ask Mace, well, look, you've been open about what happened to you, about how you were victimized by a rape. How do you justify supporting a candidate who, in a court of law, was shown to have committed sexual misconduct? And so we're gonna get to more of their exchange in just a moment. But Cenk, look, do you think it's a fair question to ask her?
Yes, but there is a but in there.
Okay.
So the thing that I would say is that I don't want reporters just asking people who suffered sexual assault if Trump is a monster and why they're supporting Trump when Trump was convicted of sexual assault in this civil context. I want them asking all Republicans or all people that support Trump because I could see how that becomes an extra burden on victims of sexual assault, that they're the ones that have to answer it the most, right? Now, having said that, is it an illegitimate question overall? No, not at all. It makes perfect sense to ask that question. And is Nancy Mace genuinely, angry at George Stephanopoulos and thinks that he's doing it only to victims of sexual assault? No, having watched the whole thing, I don't get that sense at all. I get the sense that she was desperate to not answer the question and she wanted to avoid it because it's embarrassing. Because she wants to raise her hand and say, I'm a woman who has dealt with these terrible things, so you should trust me that I have women's best interest in mind. But at the same time, if my political benefactor does the same exact thing to another woman or something similar, I don't really care, because it helps me politically. But I don't want you to think I don't care. So I'm gonna pretend to be outraged. So because if she was being honest, she could say, hey, you should ask every Republican this same exact question. I'd say deal, makes sense. You should ask every Republican this question.
And remember, Nancy Mace is the one who went out there and shared what had happened to her, specifically in a political context in the middle of a political debate. She came out and shared what happened to her during the reversal of Roe v. Wade and some of these red states basically banning abortion under any and all circumstances. And she came out and publicly talked about what she experienced and how she was victimized in order to make a point about how it's important to have exceptions for victims of rape. When you basically invite the public into your personal life and what has happened to you, when you have taken this horrific thing that's happened to you and you've used it as part of an argument, a political argument, well then all bets are off and you should be prepared for journalists and reporters to ask you about it in other contexts.
Yeah, so I think that one of our members on the chat on tyt.com made a really good point. Zayfad Bibelbrock says, I understand where her emotion came from, but it is a fair question.
It is, I think so too.
So let's see if she has a fair answer.
And by the way, let me just also note, if there's a way of asking this question that is inappropriate, unjustified, needlessly mean, I didn't get that sense from George Stephanopoulos.
Neither did I.
So with that in mind, he did try to clarify that he was not in fact trying to shame her in any way, but she doubled down. So let's watch.
It's actually not about shaming you. It's a question about Donald Trump.
No, you are shaming
You've
me.
endorsed Donald Trump for president.
Right.
Donald Trump has been found liable for rape by a jury. Donald Trump has been found liable for defaming the victim of that rape by a jury. It's been affirmed by a judge.
It was not a criminal court case, number one. Number two, I live with shame. And you're asking me a question about my political choices, trying to shame me as a rape victim, and I find it disgusting. And this is why women won't come forward.
Women won't come forward because they're defamed by those who perpetrate rape. Donald Trump
They are judged and they're shamed, and you're trying to shame me this morning. I think it's disgusting.
I'm not shaming you at all.
I told my story. It took me 25 years to tell my story. I was judged for it. I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.
Answer it. You're shaming me for my political choices.
I'm asking you.
He's giving you an opportunity to explain why you have chosen to support Donald Trump despite these black marks on his past and his recent history. You should be ready for a response to that. And look, it's a hard question. Like, I totally understand where she's coming from in not wanting to answer that question because it is a tough question that's very likely impossible to answer.
Yeah.
But she is supporting him because not supporting him as a Republican in Congress amounts to political suicide in today's political climate. That's what the reality of the situation is.
Guys, this is not,
that's it.
It's not that close. She's obviously trying to avoid the question. So look, there's a lot of things you could say that people were trying to shame me when they ask questions. They have been asked 1,000 questions that are wildly inappropriate, and this question wasn't even inappropriate, right? But, or you could say like substantively, when I was in favor of the death penalty, you could say, oh, I could have said, are you trying to shame me saying that I'm okay with innocent people dying? Yeah, I don't know, yeah, that's the point they're making. So why don't you answer it and explain why you're not in favor of that, right? So these are fair questions in the middle of a debate that sometimes is about incredibly sensitive topics, including sexual assault. And it is also, let's acknowledge, a very logical question that if you suffered this terrible thing that you went through,
that you talk about in the context of politics.
Yeah. Don't you have some degree of sympathy for E. Jean Carroll, who went through something similar? And Trump is bragging about what he did and how he's still calling her names and making fun of her and getting crowds to laugh at her, etc. And apparently she doesn't feel that. So you can call it anything you like, Nancy Mace.
God, I mean,
but you're obviously trying to avoid answering the main question, which is why do you support this monster? And you have no good answer for that.
I mean, she's in an impossible position, right? Because she doesn't want to flat out reject or deny what the victim, E. Jean Carroll, is saying, although she does also tend to minimize what came out of that civil case. In fact, she's about to do it in the next clip. Let's just take a quick look at that.
I'm not trying to.
You are. That's exactly
what you're doing. You're not answering the question.
I think it's disgusting.
Well, you're welcome to say that, but you have to answer the question. Why are you supporting someone who's been found liable for rape?
I just answered your question.
What is the answer?
He was not found guilty in a criminal court of law. It was sexual abuse. It wasn't actually rape, by the way. And E. Jean Carroll joked about all the money she's going to get and made a mockery out of this case. And I think that's offensive. There's a reason why women don't come forward.
You said women don't come forward because they are afraid. They are afraid
they're
because
judged
they're defamed
and shamed,
by those
like you're trying to shame me this morning.
They are afraid to come forward, as you said, because they are defamed by those who commit the rape. That's what Donald Trump has been found guilty of doing.
He defended himself over that and denies that it ever happened, but he was not found guilty in a criminal court of law.
Okay, so being found guilty in a civil court of law doesn't matter. Also, women don't come forward when they've been victimized because people don't take their allegations seriously, as Nancy Mace is currently doing as we speak. And by the way, what E. Jean Carroll managed to do is something that a lot of women who have been victimized with sexual misconduct are basically never able to do, right? To, in a court of law, whether it be civil or criminal, be able to prove that they were victimized in this way. So you're right, Cenk. It's the gaslighting that's driving me nuts, and how she's kind of twisting this in like one of the most dishonest ways imaginable. But I also understand why she's doing it, because it is an impossible situation, right? How do you justify supporting a guy who honestly not only has this in his past, but the sexual misconduct stuff, but also attacked her personally, Nancy Mace personally. He has called Nancy Mace both nasty and disloyal in the recent past, and also endorsed her 2022 primary opponent.
But that's why she got scared. And she, winds up having the zeal of the converted. So she's like, well, I don't want to go through that again because that could cost me my precious power. Precious. So that's why she turned around completely on Trump and is kissing his ass no matter what he does. I mean, guys, let's look. I think one of our members, Aaron Johnson, came up with exactly what you can do in this so-called unsolvable situation. I'll get to him in a second. But in this case, what's she doing? She's shaming E. Jean Carroll. After like saying that she's so outraged by shaming any sexual assault victim, she's like, and she had the temerity to laugh once in her life. I mean, you're shaming her for that?
How are you not prepared for this question?
Yeah.
That's the thing that really stands out to me. How are you not prepared for this question? You have to have some answer. Give it some thought. Because she bungled that like crazy. There are some people who are buying the nonsense narrative that she's being shamed. But again, when she has openly and willingly shared what has happened to her, honestly, to make a political argument on a different issue, you should be ready for people to ask about how you were raped and how that plays into decisions you make on other issues, politically speaking.
Yeah, and last thing before I get to the members, this defense of, well, he was convicted only in a civil court, not in a criminal court, is one of the weakest things I've ever heard. Guys, OJ also got acquitted in a criminal court, but was convicted in a civil court of the murders of Goldman and his ex-wife, right? OJ's ex-wife, Nicole Simpson. So are all these right-wingers saying, no, OJ's obviously not guilty. He was innocent, he didn't do it at all, even though he got convicted in the civil case. Come on, that's absurd. That's obviously absurd. You know that's absurd. So last word goes to our members because they wrote in with personal stuff that I think is really important. Deanne Loso wrote in, being a victim of rape by my ex-husband, if I'd openly shared that experience, which I guess is what I'm doing right now, I wouldn't have a problem with this question. She continues, I feel shame. I think all women feel shame, but I have great sympathy for E. Jean Carroll.
By the way,
that's very logical, right? If you feel that kind of thing, that you should feel great sympathy to E. Jean Carroll. Does it look like Nancy Mace feels that kind of sympathy?
Yeah, and look, I know that I'm gonna say this and it's not gonna matter because anyone who's been victimized in this way, man, woman, doesn't matter. The shame is always there. I just wish it weren't the case because there's no reason that any victim should feel shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we love our members. Thank you for trusting us enough to share that with all of us because we all learn from it. And finally, Aaron Johnson, as I promised, he wrote in, hi, I'm a new member. I used to be a Trump supporter until all this came to light. I morally cannot support someone who sexually abuses women. Thank you for being there for America. Wow. See, Nancy Mace, that's not too hard. right? Hey, I used to like this guy for different reasons, but this is something I cannot get behind, whether it happened to you or it didn't, right? And so as a moral, decent human being, I can't support this. See, that wasn't that hard. But the reason it's hard for her is because she's so enraptured with her political career and her ego and her status and title and power that she can't let go and be honest with you guys.